Hi, and welcome. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Boise Metro Chamber's Metro Minute series, your quick guide to community impact. My name is Tori Thomas, Community and Government Affairs Manager here at the Chamber, and your host for today's event. The Boise Metro Chamber is Idaho's only five-star accredited chamber, representing nearly 2,000 members. Our events and educational content are only possible thanks to our members and their commitment to community engagement. Thank you so much for your membership. Joining us in today's episode is Representative Chris Mathias.
Hey there.
Hi, Representative. How are you?
Great. We're within sniffing distance of the end of session, so how could I be bad?
Oh my gosh, I know we're almost there.
Yeah.
And the weather's gorgeous, so
Yeah.
we're really it's just a cherry on top. Well, I'm going to do a quick bio about you, and then we'll jump into our questions. Representative Chris Mathias represents District 19 in the Idaho House of Representatives. Mathias is a graduate of Boise State University and a member of the Idaho Criminal Justice Commission and the National Black Caucus of State Legislators. He is the former Chief Academic Officer for the State Board of Education, a former U.S. Senate law clerk, and a veteran of the U.S. Coast Guard. Thank you so much for joining us and for your service to our state and our country. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, you're welcome, and thanks for having me. To you and all your members for having me. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, obviously, we're talking about the legislative session. We're well into it. From your perspective, what has been the biggest issues in the legislature, kind of focused on a business perspective? What do you think Idaho businesses should know about?
Sure, and I'm happy to expand upon any of this, but I think one of the constant themes that we hear, this is my sixth legislative session, and one of the things that has been constant throughout that is conversations about talent. How do we recruit it and how do we retain it? And it's beyond just conversations about the education budget and the career technical education and making our tax rates competitive for businesses, but it also has to do with the types of social culture warrior bills that we tend to engage in. When they come to the House floor, a lot of people argue that just by fighting about bathrooms and things like that we are doing a disservice to the business community, as the argument goes that we are making it harder to recruit talent, and for some people that are already here, retain them. I think that's one that has been pretty common throughout my time in the legislature. An issue that's been up kind of front of mind this year, however, that I think is new, at least at this scale, is the debate over the budget situation. And I think the budget situation, which I'm sure everyone watching and listening is familiar with, the state of our budget situation. But the budget situation is really a symptom, from my vantage point, it is a symptom of the larger conflict. And the larger conflict really comes down to whether we think Idaho has a spending problem or a revenue problem. I know, majority leadership is insistent that we have a spending problem and that we need to make cuts. That's the only way out of this problem. There are many people who think we have a revenue problem, that we've cut taxes too heavily, we've cut revenue too heavily, and now we're in a situation where we don't even have what we need to maintain critical programs. I'm kind of an 80-20 kind of person. I think 80% of our problem comes from our revenue habits, 20% comes from our spending habits. You mentioned that I was the chief academic officer for the state board, so I've worked in our agencies before. I do know that if you are familiar with your internal operations, there's always some bucks you can find and save. But the argument that we have an overall spending problem, I have just found to not be true, nor does the data really bear that out.
Yeah, I appreciate those. Those two topics have come up a ton, I think, with the chamber, especially we talk about talent and workforce. And I agree. I think so much of our social issues turn into a business issue because it makes it harder or easier to recruit and retain people. With the budget, obviously, I think there's been a lot of conversation with that this year. Started. Where do you think, how does the big, beautiful bill fit into that with the state and the spending or revenue issue?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about federal income taxation is that there are only so many things you can know when it matters. And when we conformed to OB3, there was only so much we knew. We knew about interest on car payments and what not taxing tips for service workers was going to do. But there was a lot we didn't know. We didn't know, for example, the extent to which businesses would make investments in research and development and write that off on their taxes this year rather than over the next few years. And these are not things we can know. And so I think, to your question, I think what we're going to find out is that the fiscal impact statement for our conformity bill, and I don't remember what the bill number is, I apologize, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bills, is I think the estimate from the bill sponsor was $150 million or $155 million. I reckon it's going to end up being a lot more than that. And when that comes true, hopefully it doesn't, but if it comes true, I think that's going to create some bigger problems in our budget that we are not addressing right now.
Yeah, I think this obviously is one of the biggest topics this session, but it seems like it'll continue down the road for our state. And we really appreciate all the conversations that are happening. It's not an easy one, especially someone that's not good at math like I am. I am very much an artsy and chatty person. So math is not my strong suit. So I appreciate everyone that's willing to discuss the funds so that I don't have to. Well, jumping into, you serve on quite a few committees, but starting on the Judiciary Rules and Administration Committee, from a business standpoint, what legal or regulatory discussions are happening on that committee this year?
Yeah, well, lots of them, but the ones with, I think, the greatest implications for businesses and those who run and own businesses, I think there are two. One is, and this is kind of new-ish, is the number of private enterprises that we are pulling into state code. I'm thinking of a number of the bathroom bills that have been introduced this year, 606, 607, 752. All of these bills are bringing the state into private companies' bathrooms, making, I think they call them public accommodations in code. That's new. In and of itself is not necessarily always a problem. We regulate private business all the time. I think where it's going to become a problem for businesses is when you overlay these public accommodations and these, private business enterprises, you overlay them with the increased number of private causes of actions that we are putting on our bills. For those that don't know, these private causes of actions are the legislature's creation of a right to sue for citizens. So, for example, House Bill 607, which is waiting for a committee hearing, essentially says that, if I'm in the men's bathroom and Tori comes into my bathroom, I get to sue the business owner for letting her in and not taking reasonable steps to keep her out. Some of this stuff to some people seems, common sense and simple. To others, it doesn't. But at the end of the day, if you own or operate a business, what the legislature is doing in the Judiciary and Rules Committee will absolutely have an impact on, I think, your ability to not just, maintain a competitive business, but also do it in a compliant way that doesn't needlessly draw down on operational resources. And as a small business owner myself, I know that just a single change in the state code can create real work for small business owners. And so I'm very sensitive to that. So I think those are kind of the two biggest ones that I see impacting businesses, are pulling in public accommodations and other private enterprise spaces and real pieces of real estate, and then overlaying private causes of action so that citizens can sue private businesses when private businesses don't do enough per state code.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up the private rights of action. That's something that the chamber has been looking at over the last couple of years, because I think Idaho has touted itself as a state that we don't have that many lawsuits against businesses, and we pride ourselves on that. And as a chamber, we like to share that kind of information with businesses. And so when we start to see this in so much legislation, it definitely catches our eye. Where do you see that going? It seems like now there's a conversation of like a good private right of action and a bad private right of action. As from a legal perspective, do you see those continuing, and how do people work through those?
I mean, that's a great question. And there are people who are much wiser than I on this particular aspect of the law. I think one of the challenges we're going to face is that what these private causes of actions do is they turn each of us into, citizen cops, and they the threat of litigation turns us into hyper-aware people. And there are some Idahoans who are looking for reasons to sue, looking for people who are violating the law. And I think what's happening is it's turning Idahoans against themselves in the context of the kind of polarization that's already occurring. So I think people who are, opposed to, who don't like transgender people are looking for reasons to sue businesses that treat transgender people with equality and respect. And then there are people on the opposite side who are looking to do the opposite. So I don't know how this will play out. I think the current legislature, given its composition, is comfortable with these private causes of action. And I think the longer the legislature stays or the composition of the body stays the way it is, I think we're going to continue to see them. And I think they're going to continue to pit Idahoans against one another and increase, the litigious nature of our society, which, like, as you mentioned, has not historically been the case.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, we'll continue to see where that goes down the line. I think so many businesses and so many different issues experience or are experiencing this conversation. So we'll as we continue talking about the workforce and how we recruit and retain and keep businesses here and keep young people here, you sit on the education committee as well. What conversations are around, Idaho students, keeping them here, continuing their education, all of the above with education?
Yeah. Well, obviously, conversations about the Idaho Launch Program are going to continue to stay at the forefront because of, the governor's support, the Workforce Development Council support. Most of the constitutional officers are big supporters of the program. It's already being trimmed down this year. It's an $83 million program. I think at least 20 million is going to come out of it this year. I think again next year. Something along those lines. I think that is going to, regardless of what your position is on launch, whether you think it's a good program or whether you think it's not a good program, when you look at the data, I think it's quite evident that there are a number of kids who graduate high school in Idaho and then go on to some sort of meaningful post-secondary education, credential, certification, 2-year degree, 4-year degree, on in-demand careers. And I think launch has a pretty positive material effect on that. That notwithstanding, there are also some structural challenges that I've been glad that the legislature is dealing with this year, specifically around CTE. We just heard a bill the other day that is designed to make it easier for people who have industry experience to get into the classroom to teach and make sure that the next generation, their successors, have the skills that they need so that they can live meaningful, fulfilling lives once they graduate high school. So I've been really glad that kind of CTE's needs have become front and center. I think my biggest concern about the state of all of this year is kind of just at a global level, thinking about the state of public education in Idaho. It has really come, and I know a lot of people will say that this isn't true, but it really has come under this sort of attack where, we call teachers this, we call teachers that, we call principals this, we say kids are not learning, they're being indoctrinated, and then we turn around and we keep heaping regulations on them. At the end of the day, I think we need to stand up for our public education system because it is one of the last mechanisms that we have generally available for people to achieve the climb the social ladder and get ahead and achieve the American dream. There's no better mechanism of social mobility than the public education system. That said, there are absolutely things that public education proponents need to do to help shepherd along important changes. For example, the funding formula is grossly outdated and needs to be revised. I think a lot of us are willing to concede that the butts and models approach to public education is not good for a lot of our kids, and figuring out ways to get them out of the classroom, out of the building, into experiential learning, apprenticeships, internships, externships, whatever you want to call them. I think that's really meaningful. But we need everyone to be at the table to not just defend these goals, but also provide the types of opportunities that exist, which will require business partnerships, a lot of them. And so I think we really do need to stand up for our public education system when it comes to making sure that our kids are graduating high school with the things that they need to be able to contribute to their communities, to contribute to Idaho, raise a family, and do all the things that we all want to do for one another and for our own children.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for that. I do agree. I think there's things that can be improved on, obviously, and there's also so much support that we can be giving to our teachers, I have a whole family of teachers. I was homeschooled, but I never grew up hearing, public school was bad or we shouldn't support that. It just was what worked for my family. And I do agree. I think there's kids out there that might work for them, or maybe they go to public school, but it looks a little different for them, or maybe they are in apprenticeships a little earlier. I think there's just so many avenues. And I agree. I think having everyone at the table and then having the people and the resources to execute those options are, we're at a really cool turning point of education to see how much could happen. The chamber is a huge supporter of Idaho Launch. And I think you're right. The data has been really amazing to see that come through.
And Tori, you raise another important point, which is one of the greatest things about Idaho is how much access we have to different schools of choice and learning opportunities of choice for our kids. I mean, I've got 2 kids. They are very different beings when it comes to how they learn, how they consume and synthesize information. And I really love that about Idaho, that we definitely put in a concerted effort to make sure that families have choices. I obviously think there's things we could do even more to be better about it and make sure that people who don't have choices have more actionable choices. But I think that's a really positive aspect of our educational system and our ecosystem when it comes to providing opportunities that people are going to need to get ready for the workforce, enter the workforce, and be successful in the workforce.
Yeah, I agree. I think totally. It's so cool to see so much variety in Idaho kids, and then also to see them remain here, to get into in-demand careers, and to just want to enjoy our state. It's a great state to be a part of.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of our state, agriculture is one of Idaho's largest economic drivers. You also sit on the Ag Affairs Committee. What issues are you seeing that could impact the future of Idaho's agriculture economy?
Ooh, this is a question with probably the most viable answers. To give you kind of a summary of what I've heard in committee this year, input costs. If you're a farmer or a rancher, input costs are really, really high right now, all the way from tractor costs to hiring someone to come repair your tractor, to the amount of money it costs to pay for the electric to run your pumps, your water pumps. Input costs are really, really high right now. And the sense I am getting is that while they might retreat a little bit, some of them, this is kind of the new normal. And that makes me a little nervous because our family farms in particular are not able to sustain these increased costs. So that's another one of the concerns we're hearing. Big corporate factory farms, which there's not that many in Idaho, but farms are being concentrated as we speak, which means small family farms are going away. And small family farms are really good for all of us for all kinds of reasons. Another issue that I think is going to become, it's a problem for us, but it's outside of our legislature's ability to fix. We just heard a resolution the other day about the Tier 2 duties that were originally adopted at the turn of the century to protect America's sugar industry, including sugar beets, which Idaho, being the second largest producer of sugar beets in the country, really cares about this. And what's happened is those duties have not been calibrated in the last quarter century. And so now the United States is being flooded with cheap, out of country, in many cases, lower quality sugar, because what we haven't done is raise that duty to disincentivize the importation of that sugar. A lot of people have a misconception that, the federal government subsidizes, our sugar beet growers, for example. What actually is happening is the federal government is disincentivizing the importation of cheaper, lower quality alternatives from out of country. So there are all kinds of things that are happening. As someone who represents downtown Boise, North Boise, we live in many instances the furthest from where our food is produced. And so I personally really enjoy serving on the agricultural committee and being able to help bridge the gap between, where our food comes from and then where much of it is consumed, especially at all the restaurants in downtown Boise. So a lot of challenges. The thing I will say about the Ag Committee as a whole, I've sat on 4 or 5 committees in my in my period in the legislature, and the Agricultural Committee is is one that I really love, not just because we get the best set swag, we get sugar and we get all the treats, but because it's such a close nexus between the people in the field, literally, and the legislature. And when they come to us and say, these are our pain points, these are our opportunities, this is what we need the legislature's help with, it's a very receptive audience in our committee. We ask hard questions, we do hard things, but it's a very receptive audience in ways that, when teachers come to the education committee, in all honesty, the committee is not always, receptive to those requests, and we do not just do what they ask like we do for the ag community. So in that regard, being on the ag committee is a real privilege and enjoyment.
That's really cool. I'm glad to hear you say that. I think it's obviously so many industries come to the legislature with their livelihoods on the line, and they truly do believe that they're coming to testify for something. And you all do so well at trying to hear them and trying to figure out what works best for your districts or for your areas, for the future of Idaho. But it is truly, ag is so ingratiated in this is everything. This is and I think you're right. If you're seeing less families involved because of costs or just a change of our state, it is definitely the time to be giving them some speaking time.
Agreed.
And being in so close to downtown Boise, I also appreciate all the work that is our downtown Boise and our food and all the restaurants. And so it's we love to see those people thriving, and they thrive because of so many ag and just so much of the ag industry behind them.
Yeah, and just to provide an example of why it's so important, it's obviously important in the short term, but it takes a lot of capital and it takes a lot of infrastructure to, for example, again, process sugar beets. An individual grower does not have, nor can they have, the infrastructure to process their own sugar beets. So sugar beet growers have formed their own collective, and they have infrastructure that they've built and maintained to do this. What happens, and what's happening across the country, is if small sugar beet farmers can't farm anymore and there's not enough people in the co-op, well, then they have to shut down the processing facilities, which means that people who could still farm now don't have anyone to sell and process beets to, and so they can't farm anymore. So it has a real a negative cascading effect when we don't stand up for family farms all the way downstream. And I think it's something that it's a challenge that everyone on the committee takes pretty seriously, and I really enjoy that aspect of the work.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that perspective. Well, as we close out today, I think everyone's dying to discuss the rat situation we have currently in the Treasure Valley. I don't think that was necessarily on my bingo card, that we would all be stressed out about this year. But is there any legislation or anything that you can share with us on the conversation of this issue that would maybe kind of calm our growing fears around the rats?
Yeah. So if we would have had this conversation at this time yesterday, I would have said there's a lot of good news. But Senate Bill 1271 failed on the House floor yesterday afternoon. I was like 35 to 30, 40 to 30, something along those lines. And that was a bill that would, among other things, it would have, made a couple of pest designations in different sections of code: ag pest, county commissioner, abatement authority pest, things like that. But what it also did, and one of the reasons I supported it, is because it would have had the Department of Agriculture essentially bring all the people to the table and come up with a plan to figure out how we're going to work on this together. It wouldn't have created a new program, wouldn't have given them any money, just they kind of have the respect and the convening power to bring all the stakeholders together. And it died. And one of the reasons that it died, I think the two biggest concerns that emerged at the committee level, for sure, it was, we heard from the pest control industry that this is a job for the private sector. Government doesn't need to get involved. And the second thing we heard that seemed to be successful on the floor yesterday was the classic, this is just government encroachment into another problem. And if we greenlight this, if we greenlight the Department of Ag doing this, it's going to become a big, runaway program, and they're going to ask for millions of dollars. one of the points that the bill sponsor made on the floor, not using this analogy, but is essentially one of the reasons that he was supportive of having a state agency kind of convene everybody is because it doesn't really make sense for one jurisdiction to deal with rats and another one next door not. It's like having a no smoking section in a restaurant. If it's happening in one side of the line, the rats don't care about the county line or the city line. They're going to find their way, and they've been working their way down the, up canal, up river for the last, I heard one of the pest controllers who testified in House Agriculture Committee said that he has photo evidence of Norway rats in Caldwell in 2011. So people in the industry have known that we have these rats since 2011, but now they're getting pretty close to downtown Boise. So what I considered to be a really good bill died yesterday. And now what's left is a bill by Representative Skog and myself, House Bill 781. All it would do is amend Idaho Code 25-2601. And I wanted to write this down to make sure I got it right, to specifically include rats as pests for which county commissioners are allowed to control if they want to set up an abatement district, if they want to set up a plan to deal with it, they can. And it's got things on there that you'd expect, mosquitoes, voles, and things like that. We just want to add rats to that list. But even that can cause some problems, because once you put rats on that list, there might be a county, in Twin Falls, for example, rat could show up and all of a sudden a local group of citizens could start putting pressure on the county commissioners to create an abatement district for rats. And once you do that, you're using money to fight rats that could go to fighting mosquitoes or going to fight other pests. And so it really could create competition for scarce resources. So that could create a problem too. So I don't know what's going to happen. The only thing I do know is that the state is not going to help us anytime soon.
But that doesn't change being able to get rid of if you have rats in your home or near it, you are able to take care of them for, get pest control involved. But from a state perspective, it could turn into more of an Department of Ag, and there could be a whole process on how to help the entire state with it.
Yeah, so there is information available right now for people who want to figure out how to rat-proof their home. A lot of good information, and you should go find that information and do those things. Because if rats find their way into your home, it's going to cost you at least $900 to abate it. That was what we were told in committee. And what we know is that not every single Idahoan has $900 to get rats out of their home. And if I get rats out of my home, but my neighbor doesn't, that home becomes a sanctuary home for rats. And then the problem just gets worse, which is why this idea of coordination and working together at scale was really attractive to so many of us. So I don't know what's going to happen. In the short term, I think it's really important for residents, especially in the Treasure Valley, to rat-proof their homes. Simple things that can be done to rat-proof their homes.
Awesome. Thank you. That's, on my mind often. So I live on the Boise bench. I have not seen or heard of any yet. But this is a conversation that Bobby Joe and I have a lot. And I think it's been a concern. So I appreciate you, all the work that you do, the rats, but overall just at the legislature. We really appreciate you. And yeah, thank you so much for your service, for being here today. And we're wishing you luck as the legislature kind of slowly comes to an end.
Thanks, Tori. I really appreciate it. It was an honor to be here. It's an honor to serve. It's extremely fulfilling. So couldn't ask for anything better. So thanks for having me. And thanks to all your members for all they do.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks to everyone that tuned in today. Thank you to our media partners, Idaho Ed News, Idaho Capital Sun, and Idaho Press. And yeah, we'll see you on the next Metro Minute.